Well, I'm here today with Dr. Vikram Baliga of Texas Tech University. Hi, Vikram. How are you?
I am doing pretty well. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm so glad that you could get together with us. I've been a big fan of you're a podcaster too, and I'm sure you'll tell us about that pretty soon. But I've been a big fan of your podcast, Planthropology, for a while. So it's really fun to get to talk to you. And while we're at it, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, sure. And I appreciate you having me on. I know we've been trying to coordinate this for a little while, and
Yeah.
it's nice to finally get to talk with you. And appreciate the kind words as well. I'm Vikram Baliga. I have a PhD in horticulture, a couple of other degrees in horticulture too. I've studied plants for quite a while, and I am a lecturer of horticulture here in the Department of Plant and Soil Science at Texas Tech. I run our greenhouse and horticultural gardens on campus. What else? I have done a lot of work in landscapes and water conservation and sort of small acreage food production. That's been kind of my focus for most of my career.
Mhm.
And have a couple of podcasts, one called Planthropology, and then one that I record with our public media folks here at Texas Tech called In the Grow. And it's
Really? I
a
did not know.
yeah, so we it's a weekly podcast. It airs here locally on our NPR affiliate.
Uh-huh.
Excuse me, I'm trying to get over a cold, so if I'm a little bit sniffly today, that's why.
It's okay, I
Uh,
can cough.
and so yeah, that one is. I've been doing it, gosh, a little over a year now, I think, and I can't remember exactly when we started actually. And we do just home gardening tips, shorter episodes, and
Nice.
but yeah, it's more that one's more like locally focused on West Texas, but
Mhm.
we try to talk about things that are applicable outside of that as well.
Sure. And that one's called In the Grow, huh?
In the grow. Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Very
So
cool. Yeah.
if you're in Lubbock or the Lubbock area, it's like 98.1 FM. It also airs in El Paso, I believe, or gets syndicated through El Paso, but I'm not exactly sure what the radio station is there. But you can get it in a couple places.
Okay, cool. So you run the greenhouse and you do these podcasts, which I can't believe you have 2. That's crazy. I have a hard time keeping up with the 1. What do you do in your greenhouse work? What's a day in the life look like for you?
It depends very much on the day. We are so it's primarily a teaching facility. So we have 8 greenhouse compartments. Each one's just over 2,000 square feet, so they're fairly large greenhouses. So we have about 16, 18,000 square feet of greenhouse space, plus 4 classrooms and 3.5 acres of horticultural garden that surround it. So I manage the whole facility, including the
Wow.
garden. We teach our intro horticulture labs here, as well as entomology, weed science, turf grass, floral design, plant materials. I'm missing one. Oh, someone's going to be offended. I don't remember. So a variety of labs and classes and things get taught out here. So, on an average week during a normal semester, whatever that means anymore, we'll run 600 students through this greenhouse a week. So
Wow.
it stays busy. We do undergraduate research here as well as graduate student research. So, about half our facility is strictly like undergraduate education focused. We have plants that we use to teach plant materials and propagation methods and everything else. Oh, that's the other one, propagation methods.
Okay.
Uh, there you
You
go.
got it. You got it.
And then we have some more dedicated research space. But it's still, focused on teaching grad students how to do research and those kinds of things. So it's busy, it's variable. I never have probably 2 of the same days in a row, and but it keeps things interesting. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like fun and very busy. That's a lot. So one of your big focus areas with your career has been working on multi-purpose landscapes. And I'm wondering if you can, just give us like a short 411 about that. What's going on with multi-purpose landscapes that we need to know?
Excuse me. So yeah, it's not I'm not going to say it is a new landscape idea. It's actually a very old landscape idea that's gaining like popularity again these
Uh-huh.
days.
Everything
So
old,
the
everything old is new again, that sort of thing.
that's kind of where it seems like we're going with a lot of things, especially in our industry, in our
Mhm.
field. But the basic idea is that we use our space for more than one thing. It's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. And the, one of the resources that, in a lot of ways, is the least renewable is space, is arable, growable land. Um, and as cities get bigger and urbanization, even in traditionally agricultural communities like this one around Lubbock, we have 300,000 people here now, and we're projected to gain another 100,000 in the next 10 to 15 years. So it's becoming a large, sort of urban area. We got to figure out how to feed all these people in cities. And one of the messages I like to send as I talk about conservation and water and other resources is not that we shouldn't use the resource, but that we should use it as efficiently as possible. So as we develop cities, we still want public green spaces, urban green spaces that look good, home gardens that look good, home landscapes that look good, because it raises property value, it improves quality of life, all these things. But if we could also grow food in the process, like we're kind of killing two birds with one stone, and we're feeding more people, and every gallon of water we put out is serving more than one purpose.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I look at it. That we're taking the space and the resources we have, and we're doing as many things with it as possible.
Yeah. So, I have a question about that because I've tried to do this in the past and I'm not very good at it, but I've tried. I love to garden flowers and I have flowers for butterflies and birds and all that good stuff because 'cause I'm into wild things too. And so but it'll so, like, in my front yard, I'll put tomatoes and peppers in there and stuff, and then it just looks like, if you come to my door, it's like, "Oh, hey, you've got a pepper in your flower garden." How do because I'm not very good at integrating it and making it look good. What kind of advice do you have for people who wanna do that, but wanna make it look good too and make it pretty and what
Sure.
yeah.
I think when I think about landscaping in general, zoning things in your own garden is kind of the way to go. So I think things planted in mass make more sense from a visual standpoint. So instead of saying like I've got a bed of, I don't know, petunias, whatever,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter, wildflowers, and then like throwing a tomato or two in there, like just in the middle of the bed, it sticks out more.
Yeah.
So what you could actually do instead is have like dedicated areas in your landscape that work into the design. So like this is my wildflower patch. And then it sort of bleeds into an area where you have some tomatoes and peppers, which bleeds into something else. So I think when you group like 5 or 6 of those plants together, it's like, oh, it's supposed to be that way, right? Like we're supposed to have a patch of vegetables and then a patch of wildflowers and then a patch of agave or whatever else.
Mhm.
Not that you can't sprinkle them in like throughout the landscape, but the human eye kind of looks for groupings of things. And when you group things together, they sort of at the same time like have a bigger impact, but they sort of disappear. You don't see the individual tomato in a bed of something else.
Okay.
You have, oh, this is where the tomatoes go and it makes sense. This is where the lettuce goes and with maybe some sage or something behind it, some salvia behind it. Like, oh, it makes sense. Like people can contextualize that better.
Gotcha, and that does make sense. That probably would look better than just a random tomato or a random bell pepper over there with the cosmos or whatever.
Right, sure.
That's good. So, also so I just said I like to, I love to have butterfly visitors and bird visitors to my garden. So what's your best piece of advice for those of us who want to grow food and also, want to provide for the wild things?
Sure. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think that even a lot of the edible plants that we think of in the landscape, maybe not even the more traditional ones like tomatoes and peppers, although those do, provide good sources of forage and things for wildlife. But you can think of plants like echinacea or calendula or different flowers that have maybe edible properties or you know, different sort of, maybe I don't want to say medicinal. That's not the word I want, but different types of properties that we can use for different products that are also like great pollinator plants. I tell you, some of the best things you can do is like add herbs in the garden. So things like basil and thyme and rosemary, like we still get the sort of culinary aspect of it,
Mhm.
but pollinators love those flowers. We
Mhm.
like our basil out here is constantly covered in bees.
Mhm. And a lot of them, a lot of the herbs, the caterpillars are just they just go crazy for them, and I like sharing, so I'm okay with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I encourage people to be diverse in the way that they think of their landscapes. And we sort of regionally tend to fall into some ruts in terms of like what plant materials are used and in which way they're used. You drive around a city and it's like, oh, okay, I've got knockout roses and like mealy blue sage, and that's all that's in the landscape. And you see it over and over and over, and people start to think that, oh, this is all I can use. When the fact is, Texas is such a diverse state. Just talking about Texas, that there's so many things we can use in so many different places. It's just kind of getting creative, and I think largely just not being scared to sort of try stuff. Put things in that may or may not work, and if they don't, okay, for next year.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Um, are there any good examples of or like places where we could see some good examples of multi-purpose landscapes in Texas anywhere? Anything you can think of?
That's a good question. And I think, unfortunately, they're a little bit few and far between. That's one thing we're trying to do up here at our horticultural garden on campus is make some demonstrations of, okay, how do we use fruit trees in the landscape? How do we use herbs and different edibles in the landscape? So we have large parts of the garden that, we in our planting beds or in our large raised beds, even we'll put in flowers and ornamental grasses, but then also tomatoes and peppers and other things as well. I think I've seen some of this at like the San Antonio Botanical Garden, Zilker Gardens in Austin. I know the Dallas Arboretum and the Fort Worth Botanical Garden have done a little bit of that. So I think some of our larger sort of like botanical institutes and public gardens are starting to do it. I would love to see more of it, but I think that as the sort of idea gains popularity again, we'll start to see more and more of that.
Mhm. I hope so. I would love to see some examples, where I live, so I could, copy some good examples instead of throwing my one tomato plant in there with my
Sure.
wildflowers.
Say we don't see it so much here, but in Louisiana, they have a neat program to where they'll alternate rice and crawfish on the same location because it's a
Oh,
flooded
okay.
small
Yeah,
basin.
yeah.
Huh.
Just throwing that in there because I thought that was kind of interesting
Yeah.
what you were saying. So I think you mentioned urban green spaces as well somewhere in there. That's a big focus of yours, right?
Yes. Yeah, it is.
Could
Yeah,
you
it
tell
is.
us what kind of got you into that? What drew you into urban green spaces?
Sure. So I spent, before I took this job at Texas, so I've been here in this position about 4 years now. And before that, I spent 4 years as a county agent, also here in Lubbock with the Extension Service as a county horticulture agent. And a big part of my um, job was working with small acreage farmers. And a lot of these are like urban backyard farmers. And what we started to see through that is as they collaborated and as they worked together, things like community gardens and school gardens started to, in some ways, almost naturally just come out of that collaboration. It's like, okay, we've got our own sort of insular gardens that we all do and, go and sell at the farmer's market. But what if we taught the community about that? What if we taught kids about that? And so, just by way of that and working with some school garden groups around town, I've gotten very interested in not just community gardens, but public and urban green space in general. Like, how do pocket parks and community gardens and rights of way with more trees and sidewalks with more plantings, like improve city life, improve the quality of life and safety and health and fitness of a community. And there's so much data out there about like the benefits of it. I think that all cities, I'm not even going to say cities past a certain size, really all cities should have some of these kinds of projects. Now, it's easy to think about the city park that is manicured and has a pond and all of those kinds of things. But what about like the empty lot that nobody's doing anything with, or the old derelict homes that are just going to be torn down, that we could turn into public space for the communities to serve a lot of different purposes? So that's somewhere that, you know, long term I want to focus some of my research time is how do we make these kind of like spaces better? How do we make them actually serve the communities in the way they're intended to?
That would be really valuable because we do have a lot of places in a lot of Texas towns that I know where it's that, you know, there's an area that's just not being used anymore. And so it just sits there until somebody decides to either do something with it or it gets torn down, like you say. But it's not really serving a whole lot of purpose in that state, you know?
Yeah, and so we're working on some projects. So our department actually sort of owns a community garden. It's a weird situation. There was a homeowner in a neighborhood about a mile and a half from campus, I mean, real close, that had a like she owned a home and then she owns a double lot right next to it, double city lot. It's about oh 12, 14,000 square feet. Like it's not a small space, but it's not enormous, a quarter acre or so. And she had started a little community garden on it, and it had been a collaboration with different groups around town, the neighborhood association, all of that. Um, and she decided she's getting older. She decided she wanted to donate it to the university so that it wouldn't just get eventually sold and turned into two small houses, right? And so, being the garden guy, that's apparently my job too. So I'm overseeing this community garden. I've got a grad student working on it right now. And it's a cool little space. We're trying to figure out long term what we want to do with it, but we're trying to balance production for that community and having like vegetables available with having a space where people can just kind of come hang out and eat lunch and things like that. So we're working on plans for that, and it's been a cool project. Uh, it's been challenging in a lot of ways because it's sort of a separate thing, and like funding for those and getting volunteers for those and all of that is complicated. But we're excited to see where it goes.
Yeah. So you just touched on something that I wanted to ask you about. If there are folks who are listening who say, "Oh, I would love to do something like that." What does it take? Does it just take, you know, like a little army of, excuse me, like a little army of volunteers to get started? Does it take a lot of money? You know, how do you make something like that happen?
Yeah, great question. The answer is yes to both to a certain extent, right? Like I think you can make up for some of the financial side of it by having enthusiastic people. It doesn't take a lot of money to start a garden, but you know, you do have to potentially pay for power and water and
Um,
supplies and tools and all kinds of those things. It doesn't have to be expensive, but like that has to come from somewhere, right?
mhm.
Whether that is donated by community organizations or businesses. I know a lot of our stuff came from even like Home Depot and Lowe's. They donated quite a bit of stuff, and
Well, that's nice.
not necessarily money, but like in kind, like wood for raised beds and material things like
Right.
that. You know,
Mhm.
uh, but the bigger thing is having people that are willing to go do the work. A lot of these projects, unfortunately, start off like real strong. Uh, and then people move, people get different jobs, people's like lives change. And it often ends up like one or two people get saddled with all of the work.
Yeah.
And so the biggest challenge is okay, how do we make something sustainable in terms of not just the like ecological side of it or monetary side of it, but just on the manpower side. And
Mhm.
that's a question I wish I had a better answer to because we're figuring that out as well. But what we hope to do long term is sort of build a playbook for urban green space. And okay, here are things that have worked for us. here are things based on data and experience from other places may work across the board. Here's signage design, here are logistics, and have that be a thing that's available for people in different communities wanting to start projects like this.
Mhm.
That's a long-term goal.
Oh, I think that would be great because humans are really good at starting stuff and we're less good at sticking with it. I'm thinking about my own craft room at home for one thing, but just keeping that momentum going and making sure, like you say, that it doesn't fall to one or two people over time. That would be great to have some instructions like that, I think.
For sure.
Super helpful. So we mentioned before that you're a podcaster. I want you to tell, and I didn't even realize that you had a second one, but Planthropology, I think, is widely popular, but for folks who aren't familiar with it, uh, give us the pitch and why do we need Planthropology in our lives?
So I started Planthropology in 2019 because I was trying to finish my dissertation and I didn't want to. So I was, grasping at here are other things I could do with my time. Which I think a lot of academics out there probably relate to.
Yeah.
Either your house gets real clean or you start a podcast or something.
Something like that. Yeah.
So the basic idea is that I talk to plant people about not the subject matter as much, but about why they care about the environment and care about what they do.
Mhm.
The name sort of came from a conversation I had with a friend about the anthropological past connection we have to the environment, right? Like how we as a species have this deep rooted connection to plants and nature that we're trying hard to forget over the past few decades in some ways. And I'm really interested in why plant people keep being plant people, why they keep doing what they do 10 years into their career, 20 years into their career. And so the basic idea is that I interview people working in the industry, students, professors, anyone who will talk to me that are even tangentially related to plants about why, how did they get into it? Why did they still do it? It's very casual. It's very
Yeah.
kind of laid back. And then I've over the past years done some solo content where I just do episodes about stuff that I think is interesting.
Yeah.
Because at some point I was like, it's my podcast. I do whatever I want. So.
That's right. I do what I want. So, and I have to say, the combination of plant and anthropology into one word is genius. I love that name so
Brilliant
much.
name.
Yes, it is.
Well, I appreciate it.
It is.
So speaking of podcasts, there are a lot of people want to start podcast or are starting podcast or are already in the midst of a podcast.
Sure.
What advice would you give to, people who are sitting there thinking about putting something, down on paper and recording it and going through the process? What advice would you give to a new podcaster?
So I think and that's a good question. I've been thinking about that. And I think the biggest thing is having a clear why in mind. Because you can pick up the technical skills, you can get on YouTube and learn the basics of recording and audio editing in a couple of hours. And you don't have to have any if you can record it on your cell phone. There's podcasts out there that are getting thousands of downloads an episode that they're essentially, it sounds like they're recording on an open mic on their cell phone sitting in the middle of a table. Right now, I find some of those unlistenable personally, but I'm also sort of an audio snob in a lot of ways. So, but more important than the technical side of it, or the, I have to get this many follower, blah blah blah. All that's noise. In addition to a good value proposition, right? Why should people care? Why are you talking about your topic? So my biggest advice for a podcaster is not don't just start one to start one, which some people have gotten bored and have done. And the average life of any podcast across the board is 7 episodes.
Really?
And then they're gone.
Wow,
a podcast.
We're killing it, Andrew.
Yeah. No, but really podcasts that make it past episode 15 are honestly pretty rare if you look at the
Really?
data.
I had
There
no
are
idea.
currently 4.2 million podcasts on the planet,
Oh my
and
gosh.
the average number of episodes is like 6.
Wow.
So that should tell you something, right? Like, if you don't have a clear picture of why you're doing it, if you're not talking about something that you actually care about, like,
Mhm.
one, your listeners are going to sniff that out pretty quick.
Sure.
Uh, and if you're not passionate about it, there's no reason for them to be passionate about it. And two, like, y'all know it's time consuming.
Yeah.
Like, I have taken a very long break. I was like, I'm going to take the summer off, and now it's November. I'm like, oh, I should record an episode. Um, because it's time consuming. You've got to do research, you've got to edit, you've got to record. You have to, especially if you're on a podcast that has guests, you've got to coordinate with them. There's all this that goes into it, and if you don't care, like, yeah, it's easy to do for 3 or 4 episodes, and it's like, oh, I've got other things to do with my time.
Yeah.
I think the other piece of advice would be to, like, be pragmatic about what success looks like in the podcast space, because we have examples like Twitter and TikTok and Instagram and all this where it's easy to kind of go viral and get a million likes on something. I say easy, but like, thousands of likes and hundreds of interactions and all these things like that happens on social media a lot. And podcasting is not that way. Uh, we have examples of, I'm not going to say anyone's name, but big podcasters that got bought by Spotify that may be getting like 5-6 million downloads an episode.
Mhm.
Uh, that is by far the exception to the rule, right? Like the average podcast in its first week of life gets 80 downloads, something like that. That's the median podcast. And so, like, I think people need a clear picture of, okay, if I'm reaching even 50 really interested people, like, that's success. Like, people that listen every week that are excited about what you have to say. The sort of overall take for me is that, like, my numbers matter to me because I'm a data nerd and I like seeing that kind of stuff. But if I have like 50 people that are like listening to the words I say every week, that's kind of huge, right? That
Yeah.
care enough to add that to their day. Like, I think the context for what we do and how we do it is really important.
Yeah. These are all really good points. I mean, you got to be passionate about something before you can invest this kind of time and energy into it. And then, like you say, yeah, just be realistic about the numbers because you're not going to blow up overnight like a celebrity would.
Yeah, it's different. It's a whole different vibe.
It is. It is.
And the point you made that if you're not interested in what you're saying, then other people aren't going to be
Right.
interested in what you're saying. I think that's golden. I think that's worth it.
Yes.
Its weight in gold right there.
It is. And I don't know. So, of course, I'm not going to name any names or anything, but have you have you ever interviewed someone that you're like in the middle you want to say, okay, are you bored because we're talking about your work? Could you be a little more excited about it? And then you're kind of embarrassed, like, well, I guess we have to air this now.
There have been a couple. Uh, it it felt more like that when I was mid-interview than I think it did in the final product.
Okay.
Like I go back and listen to a couple of them, and I'm like, okay, that was not as rough as I thought it was. But there have been a couple that I'm just like, I have to really crank up my energy level
Yeah.
to really drag out more discussion and more like interesting things out of a person. And luckily for me, I've had a lot of experience in like media in different formats through extension. I was a weekly guest on 2 radio shows for about 3 years. So I have hundreds of radio appearances. I've done live TV. I've done written audio, video media. And through that, I picked up a lot of the tricks that a lot of these live media folks use to drag conversation out of people.
Okay.
And just that experience has made it a lot easier for me when I'm interviewing someone to, even if it's just a few good bits of audio, like there's episodes that are a lot shorter than the recording was because I'm like, I can't, some of this is just so boring, I can't do it. If there's not many of them, like I think
Right.
I really hunt for guests that I know sort of have a propensity for it, so it doesn't happen a lot.
Yeah.
There have been a couple, but that comes with the territory, and everyone has an off day. There have been plenty of days that I've cut out a lot of my own content from episodes because I'm like, I don't even know what I'm talking about. Like it's
We've done
just
that too.
like
Yeah.
I'm just droning on. I don't know what this is even about anymore.
Yeah, you run down a rabbit hole and all of a sudden you're like, "What are we talking about now? I
Yeah,
don't
how did I get here?
know." Yeah, that happens. So I didn't let you know that I wanted to ask you about this, but, you mentioned you've done lots of media things. I wanna ask you about something that you do on TikTok, and I think you have I'm not on Twitter or whatever, but this is the funnest thing, and I want people to look this up because it's just so much fun. These, uh these seed growing hacks, I think is how they're selling themselves. What is going on with that? And tell us how you got so interested in these little videos. I think people are sending them to you now, right?
Oh, that's like, yeah, my inbox is constantly full of just like the stupidest crap that I've ever seen. Of just like people like, so a lot of it comes out of some of these like, they're essentially content farms online. Like
Okay.
they're these companies that just generate just outrageous engagement bait, right? It's like I'm going to I most of them like have bananas in them. I don't know why. I'm
Yes,
gonna stick my rose cutting in a potato or a banana and then
yeah.
plant it and then like put eggs in there. It's weird stuff, right? And it is purposefully, most of it is purposefully outrageous, right? Because it generates engagement.
Okay.
Uh well, it works apparently because like I watch some of this stuff and I'm like, are you like really? And the problem is that some people believe that these things work. Uh and so like I get people, no, I really heard that if you put like, honey on your rose cutting or your rose that you got from the store and you put it in a potato, like it'll grow. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, no, just no.
No.
Or if I, throw my seed, I don't know. It's all kinds of weird stuff. And so like one day I was just bored and I'm like, I'm going to make a reaction video to this. And it turns out that people think that's funny. And
Very
so in my little lizard brain, I'm like, oh, must do more, you know,
funny.
like people like must do more.
Yeah.
And so I get them nonstop. And it's really just for giggles. But at the end of the day, some of these hacks are things that people are like, they're just believable. Some of them are just believable enough that people are like, oh no, I could do this.
Then somebody
This
else
is a
would
real
try
thing.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and they do, and then their house is full of gnats or whatever. And so it's good content for me, but it's also like I have thought I've long thought, and maybe this is why I fit well with extension for a while, that like education should go where people are, and it should approach people in the way that they are consuming education, if that makes sense. Like we
Yeah.
should teach people where they are and in the ways that they're learning. And now people are on TikTok, people are on like Instagram Reels, and it's not just people doing silly dances, even though there's plenty of that. Uh, but people really go there to learn things, and
Yeah.
there's some great educational content on all these platforms. So my goal is to do that, but also to make people laugh and call out some of the bad content on there,
Mhm.
uh, just to give people context for okay, this is silly, but then what's the right way to do it, right? What's the other half of that? What's the other side of that? So
Yeah.
it is a friend of mine, a former colleague, said that education is a long and repetitive process. And I think about that a lot as I make these videos that sometimes are kind of the same and they're goofy. Like, okay, but I am maybe just a little link in this person's like educational journey, learning more about plants and nature and the environment. So like, even though it's silly, like I kind of in a weird way do take it seriously. Maybe more than I should some days because I'm like, I just get worked up. I'm like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. I'm gonna yell about it on the internet for a while.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's funny that you say you have to uh teach the people where they're at because a few months back we talked to Ben Masters, the director of the Deep in the Heart film,
Uh-huh.
and that's exactly what he said. I mean, like almost word for word. He said, he didn't set out to become a videographer, but now he's into these like feature motion pictures about wildlife because people will watch a movie if it's really well made and it doesn't look like, a video that you shot with your GoPro or whatever. But
Right.
a really well made thing, people will watch it so he can educate people that way. And I think that's yeah, perfect point.
Well, and I think it kind of takes all, like, as educators, whether that is a formal educator, an informal educator, online science community, like we're all like sort of working together towards similar goals, and maybe it doesn't get um I don't know, portrayed that way, or we don't do it as well as we should, largely because at the university level we're not well incentivized for outreach, right? Like it's like you get promoted because of your papers and your
Mhm.
grants and your teaching numbers and your evaluations and blah 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 blah, right? And those
Right.
things are fine. Then they're good. But there is this big feedback loop where the people that are paying us to do the research are not getting the education, right? The taxpayer that is funding all of the nonsense we do, it's not nonsense. I'm being tongue in cheek, but like, that fund our careers,
Mhm.
like we take that information and we paywall it and we put it in a journal and we write it in jargon that they can't understand, and
And
we're not closing the feedback loop.
right. And that's when it does become nonsense. When we
Yep.
write it in that jargon so that the average person who's just interested in, I don't know, raccoons or fire or deer or tortoises or whatever, wouldn't be able to understand it if they read it anyway. So yeah, you that's an excellent point.
So, if I'm looking at one of these seed germination videos, I could talk about it in terms of like the different metabolic processes and the gibberellic acid that does this and the X blah blah blah. And that's fine for a certain, like for the classroom. Okay, I talk about those things, but in general, I'm like, no, don't put cinnamon on your seed and bury it in a potato. Don't do that. Stick it in some soil and it grows, because that's what most people just need to know is
Yeah.
like, practically speaking, how do I take this thing and how do I turn it into a tomato plant?
Right.
And like both sides of that are important, and we're not meeting in the middle for some
Mhm.
reason.
Yeah. But I think your videos are funny, and I think people love them so much because you're just saying or shouting, as the case may be, the thoughts that are in our head. We're like, "Yes, yes," and you're just saying those thoughts out loud, and that's what makes it so much fun. So, if you're listening and you have not seen Vikram's Twitters about these things, you gotta go look it up. It's gold. Now, we'd love to ask for a biology blunder of each one of our guests. Do you have a biology blunder that you could share with us today?
Oh goodness, sure I do. So research, if for those who have not done grad school, especially biological research, uh, never goes, I think, the way we think it's going to go, ever, like ever. Um, and so my master's degree was in olive trees. Like, so I studied olives and water conservation in South Texas, olives.
Okay.
Um, so I did a greenhouse study and a field study. Um, so I had 80, actually, I did my master's research in the greenhouse that I run now, which is kind of cool.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah, it's kind of full circle, right? So we had 80 something olive trees in 5 gallon pots. They're, 3 foot tall trees or whatever, doing all kinds of data on them. And we were like, okay, how do we contextualize this? Because these trees are different sizes, they're different varieties. And it was like, oh, let's get leaf area. Let's take leaf area. Turns out to get leaf area, you have to pull all the leaves off a tree if you want like full leaf area. Okay. Trees don't love that, for one thing. Deciduous, especially like a semi-evergreen, like an olive, that you really don't, it doesn't ever want to have all its leaves pulled off. So we pulled all the leaves off of 80 something trees, which, even though they look small, that's a lot of leaves. And we're running them through this leaf area meter. And somewhere along the line, we got a scale infestation on our trees, and we still had to pull leaves off, and they're covered in honeydew. And we're like slogging through scale insects on. There were a lot of different ways we probably could have done that. But it's like, oh no, this was in the proposal. This was how we decided we were going to do it. So this is how we're going to do it. So biology, I think, never really care as much about our opinions of how we should approach it. And insects are going to show up, and trees are going to resist having all their leaves pulled off and
Mhm.
run through a little machine. And so that was one of them for sure. That
That's funny.
they're, things sound like a good idea when you're writing them in a proposal.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I've like, you get a new grad student and you go out with them to help them get started on their project, in about 2 days, and you're like, "Oh my god, what idiot decided we would do it this way?" And of course, I'm the idiot, I'm the idiot who decided we were gonna do it this way. Yeah, things sound great when you're in your office typing it up, trying to get that money.
Oh, yeah, this will be great. This will be great. And then it's like, oh, this was not great. This is bad.
Yeah, and then I'm sure my grad students are cussing me every single day. "Yeah, she's an idiot." So, that is a funny one. We have you and I have a greenhouse connection. When you talk about this greenhouse that you work in, when I was at Texas Tech, I was in the Department of Natural Resources Management for a few years, and I had a cactus project that lived there in that greenhouse that you're talking about. So we have, like, I don't know, like a Kevin Bacon greenhouse degrees of freedom thing going
That's funny.
on. Yeah. Yeah, we were studying fire on this little endangered cactus. It was in production before it was declared endangered. So don't, like, write me letters, folks. But so you could just go and buy this little cactus, and we were seeing if if you burn it, does it die? Turns out it does. So just, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's funny because we do like drought studies and we
Uh-huh.
do studies like that.
Yeah.
And what we don't necessarily tell people is like, oh no, we're gonna kill all of these. Like the goal is not to see like what survives. It's almost like, what's it gonna take to kill this thing? Like how much drought is it gonna take to kill this thing?
Right.
Yeah, we murder a lot of plants in the name of science.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, those little cacti. I remember putting them back in the greenhouse, and they're these little crispy brown nugget, look like a piece of coal sitting on the pot. It's like, and then we start watering it, like, "Come on, buddy, you can do
Yep.
it." No,
No.
he died. Well, is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
I don't, nothing too specific. I just think that this whole idea is really cool. I love what you're doing, and I think any way we can cast our nets wider and talk to more people about nature and science and conservation and all the things that kind of go into it. I am a big proponent of the idea that people don't care about things they don't really understand or that they're not familiar with. So the more people that hear about some of the even the little minuscule specific things we do in science, like, oh, I care about this a little bit now because I know a little bit about it now. So
Right.
I love the project and I love what y'all are doing. And I think it's great.
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate that. And we, like I said, even before we started, we were like, "Okay, you guys, you gotta listen to this one called Planthropology. It's really fun, and it's cool, and it's interesting." So, yeah, we've been following you for a while.
Oh, cool. Cool. I appreciate that too.
Yeah. Okay, well, everybody, for our listeners, you gotta look up Planthropology podcast. And what's your other one? In the Grow?
In the grow. Yep.
Yeah, okay, that's pretty neat. Thank you so much for spending time with us. I enjoyed talking to you today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Alrighty. Well, we'll talk to you later, Vikram.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye-bye. Talk on the Wild Side is a production of the Caesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute of Texas A&M University, Kingsville. Funding for this project is provided by the Harvey Wild Sportsman Conservationist Award by the Rotary Club of Corpus Christi. Editing was completed by the talented Gabby Olivas, Andrew Lowry, and Trey Kendall. We thank the TAMAC Distance Learning Lab for all their help and cooperation.